You are listening to the Choose Your Struggle podcast, a member of the Shameless Podcast Network. This week on the Choose Your Struggle podcast is the author and criminal justice advocate Quan Huynh. But first, Kid Mental, let's go.
Things ain't always gonna go our way, but you can always win when you choose your struggle. And some battles are for yesterday, but today is for a new beginning. Choose your struggle, and don't worry about what they say, but you can always win when you choose your struggle. And you can bounce back just as Jay. Come on and listen to Choose Your Struggle. Whoa, choose your struggles. Choose your struggle. Whoa, choose your struggle.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Choose Your Struggle podcast. So great to be with you all. This is a special episode, only more amazing by what's coming on Monday. Today is the 99th episode of the Choose Your Struggle podcast. The stat that I cite a lot and that I tell a lot of people who are first starting out into podcasting is there's some truth to the stereotype that everybody and their mother has a podcast. But more accurate would be to say that everybody and their mother has started a podcast, because if you make it to episode 25, you're in the 90th percentile of podcasts. And if you make it to 100, you are in the very small percentile of podcasts. So tomorrow, or I should say Monday, the 100th episode is a big deal. The 100th episode is going to be sort of what I've learned over the last year and a half from podcasting and the people I've gotten to talk to. A bit of the 100 episode spectacular kind of thing that sitcoms do, but more just me reflecting. That's going to be Monday. So today is this is it's a big deal for me. I'm very excited to have made it this far, and I can't think of a better guest than this week's guest to celebrate this awesome occasion, because he's a guy that I think perseverance and just constant evolution are words and themes that come to mind for this episode. So the guest is Quan Huynh. And Quan is a guy who, as I called him on the theme, the intro there, Quan is a guy who's written a book, but that's sort of secondary, because he is an incredible teacher, advocate around criminal justice issues and around helping those who are getting, in some cases, their second, but let's be honest here, in a lot of cases, their first chance being released from prison, because sadly, so many of the people who are there weren't even given a first chance in the first place. And Quan himself is that guy. He served 22 years in jail, first in a youth detention center, and then as an adult, he narrowly avoided death row for a murder that he is honest that he committed. I think you'll hear in this what's so fascinating about Quan is that he is a guy who directly challenges a lot of the BS that we hear around the criminal justice system, because the first time he was arrested, it was for nothing. Did he make a dumb decision in a moment? Yeah, he did, but it was kind of a teenage decision kind of thing, partly out of defending himself and his family, that he actually wasn't even involved in a violent episode, but he got blamed for it. And then that really sent him in a direction that led to him actually committing murder, which he owns up to. And the vulnerability of this episode is unreal, because I can't imagine, people tell me I'm brave for sharing my story, but the United States especially, but this world loves a redemption story. If you don't believe me, see, any movie in Hollywood. So there definitely is a piece of that. People love to ascribe their own views on redemption and on sort of accepting our faults to my story, which is fine. People can kind of think whatever they want once I've told my story, as long as they hear my message. where you don't get the benefit of that doubt. The group that very rarely gets the benefit of the doubt is, or that lesson whatsoever, is a person in Quan's situation. Now, are there people that still love him? Of course. Are there people that accept his story? Of course. And I hope that you all listening are those people. But you know, if you are, you're in the minority. We are in the minority, because so many people see someone who's done what Quan has done, and they're like, all right, you know, that's it. You're done. You're a monster. And of course, that's not the case. You know, nobody is born a monster. There are, of course, psychological illnesses, but even, you know, it's such a small percentage of people who are born, you know, with some of these sort of the commonalities that we see in people who become serial killers. Such a small percentage of those born with those commonalities end up actually committing these violent acts. And I'm not saying Quan is that at all. That's not my point here. But I'm saying that we try to find rationalities to just say, oh, these people are monsters. They were born this way. And that's, of course, never true. So I really appreciated Quan's openness, his honesty, his vulnerability, his forthright. He didn't shy away from any of this, and I really applaud him for that, because it'd be very easy to sort of fall back on. You know, I think of like athletes, right? And I was just tweeting this the other day, right? You could say whatever you want to a baseball manager, and they're going to give you the same canned answer every time. There's that famous scene in Bull Durham. If you've not seen that sports movie, go do it. It's very good. Kevin Costner, Tim Robbins, very, very funny. But there's a scene where Kevin Costner, who's the veteran, is teaching Tim Robbins, the young sort of upstart, how to do a post-game interview. And it's, of course, you know, the same answers every time. Just happy to be here, all that kind of stuff. It'd be very easy for Quan to do that here. It'd be very easy for him to fall back on safe and easy answers. And he doesn't do it. He is very open and honest, and I appreciate that. One note, as my wife now loves to kid, it wouldn't be an episode of the Choose Your Struggle podcast without me mentioning the audio quality. Quan had an issue with his mic. We tried to make it work. I then did my best in the editing stage of this, but you'll hear it. It's rough, but that's okay. You know, I'm not a professional editor. Y'all know that. The rest of my team is amazing, as they are, and shout out to my team, because they always listen. The one thing we don't have right now, one of the things we don't have, is a professional editor in-house. So, you know, at some point, you'll probably notice a difference in sound quality. You'll be like, oh my God, what's going on? No, it's not that I just got better. It's because I finally hired someone. But that has not happened yet, and it's not happening in the near future. So, just notice that today. Other than that, enjoy this episode with Quan. And look, I'm going to say this one more time because I really think it's important. Please hold your judgments. You know, please do that. This is one of the goals of this show, is to educate, to end stigma, and then to educate with fact-based education and honest education, and not sort of the BS that tugs at our mind, our hearts instead of our minds. That means even times like this, when somebody has done something that we can all agree is atrocious, Quan says it, you know, but he still is a human, and he still deserves, you know, he deserves our empathy and our love. So please, you know, enjoy Quan's message here today, and stick around till the end for your card and your good egg. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did. But people will never forget how you made them feel. That famous quote by the extraordinary Maya Angelou is exactly why I speak. It's why I tell my story and mix education around the topics of mental health, substance misuse and recovery, and drug use and policy, with motivation, inspiration, and purpose. So when you're looking for your next keynote or breakout session speaker, reach out. Find me at my website, jshifman.com, and I promise you, your employees, your group members, the students at your school, everybody will come away having learned something. And that's how we create change. Reach out today. Thanks for sharing the podcast with your friends. If you're listening on Apple, please rate and review, or check out the review link in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah, my name's Quan Huynh. I work as the senior program manager at Defy Ventures. It's a nonprofit that helps men and women with criminal histories to transform their lives through the journey of entrepreneurship.
And you have a very applied a story to your work, isn't that right?
Yes.
Well, I would love if you took this opportunity to tell the couple-minute version of that story.
Yeah, I'm also a graduate of the program. I've done 22 years of my life in correctional institutions. I paroled from a life sentence back in 2015. I went to prison for a murder I committed back in 1999. Was given a life sentence and fortunately was paroled November 2015. So it's a little bit over 5 years now.
So I am reading your book. I'm about halfway through. And what I think is so incredibly fascinating about your book is that you mix the transcript from, you're going to correct me here, but a transcript that you actually lived through as the defendant and your own recollection of your story.
Yes, those are transcripts from our parole hearings. When you go to a parole board hearing, that's they put the transcripts, they're issued transcripts to men that are incarcerated. For some reason in the state of California, like in the prison system, men did not share their transcripts with each other. It was considered very private. It's considered you're not supposed to ask about it.
So take us back. You went to prison at a pretty young age.
Yes, I was first arrested at the age of 17, and that began a long road of going in and out of the justice system, and then ultimately with me committing murder in 1999 at 22, 23 years old.
And from your book, the first time you were arrested for a pretty capital offense was let's call it what it is. It's a little bit of BS.
Yeah, I was arrested for they charged me for 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, or 3 attempted murders and a conspiracy to commit murder. My brother and some of my friends, we had beef with some local skinhead youths at our school. They had called to threaten my family. My brother came to my work that evening. I was working at a bus at the Subway sandwich shop, and they asked if I knew where those guys lived. I didn't, and I asked my coworker if she knew, and she just drew us a very crude map saying this is where they live. My brother and my friends said we'll be back to pick you up tonight at 10 o'clock. And one of my friends had a gun at the time. It was a small 22 caliber handgun. None of us have ever shot it. We went. My friend had pulled it out before at a party when we were in high school, when these same skinheads had surrounded us, and I saw when everybody ran and just the power it gave us. So I think after that, it just became in our mindset, and just I guess every time we talked, it was like, okay, we're gonna shoot them up. We're gonna do this with the gun. It was just macho talk, I believe. So that day when they came and the map was drawn, I said, okay, when I get off, we'll find this house and we'll shoot it up. And that's what we talked about and discussed. So I got off at 10 o'clock that night. My brother and my friends weren't there. When I got home, my brother was in bed, I think, and he was terrified. He was 15 at the time, and he said that my friends had actually went to a local arcade, found another kid that knew where they lived. They went over there, and one of my friends actually ended up running up inside the house and shooting 3 of those skinhead kids. Fortunately, they all survived, but within a couple weeks, they arrested all of us, including me, for the conspiracy because I was there, what they said, the original planning.
So I think this is such an interesting story because, as we'll get to in a minute, you eventually did commit some pretty serious acts. But at this point, you weren't really like a gang kid or something, right? I mean,
No, I was not, yeah.
Yeah, at this point, you're a pretty regular teenager who gets caught up in this moment, as many of us do when we're in our teens. You do something stupid, But in this case, quite frankly, what you did wasn't even that big of a deal. You get caught up. You all of a sudden get this target on your back. You go into a juvenile detention center. And is it fair to say, and please tell me if I'm wrong, that this kind of sent you in a different direction?
Oh yeah, it absolutely did. I think it's where I felt I had to conform and try to fit in, and I wanted to make sure that I was not victimized. So to do that, I would have to begin perpetrating violence and victimizing others.
And what's so sad about this part of your story is that it is the direct opposite of what people mostly think about the criminal justice system. Oh, it's supposed to help people. It helps turn their life around. In this case, it did the exact opposite for you. Here you were a kid who was getting blamed for something that you didn't do. You were literally at work at the time that this all went down. Your only quote unquote crime was having some friends who sounded like had some anger issues, although, the skinheads had threatened your family. And now you sort of get this new brand, and it sends you in that direction towards eventually committing murder.
Yeah, I would have to say that. I remember even when we were first arrested, I felt like, how did I get arrested? And the coworker that drew the map, nothing ever happened to her. My crime meet, one of my crime mates, he was the oldest one that brought the people to the house. He got less time than me, and it was because and for me, I was like, okay, well, my coworker, because she was white, and my co-defendant, or the guy that pointed out the house, because he was white, and the rest of us were people of color, and so then they just threw the book at us.
And you had said in your book how you had trouble fitting in before this. You were in very white areas. Your dad was sort of a community organizer, a really proud of your heritage kind of family. And then it almost, from your book, to me, the sense that I was getting was that you had these dual experiences where your family was very proud of its heritage, and then that exact heritage is the reason that you get this incredibly harsh sentence when, as you're saying, other people who did worse actions were let off in an easier way.
Yeah, I think even because I grew up in Provo, Utah. That's where we came to the United States after we lost our country from the Vietnam War. And of course, my father is proud of our heritage, and he tried to instill that in me, but we were the only Vietnamese family over there, and also the only Roman Catholic family. And so it felt like we just stuck out. And of course, I think what kid wants to stick out? They all want to be liked. We want to be accepted. And that's all I wanted. So I remember just thinking, my father telling me, oh, just be proud of the heritage. But I think it was that heritage and looking different is the reason why I was teased at school, and why there were incidents of racism while we grew up over there.
So you're 17, you go through that experience, you end up going to this juvenile detention center. And how long are you in there?
I ended up doing about 2.5 years. On that day, I ended up pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit a crime. They sentenced me to 7 years. And then in the California Youth Authority, we also go to parole hearings. And I think, I'm not totally sure, but I think even the commissioner, when I went to my first hearing, I think he knew I kind of got screwed on a raw deal, because I was let out very early before I even was transferred. They paroled me from, I think, my very first initial hearing, which is unheard of.
And how long between being let out and do you go back in?
About 9 months or a year. I got violated the first time. I was with by that time I came home. I didn't really feel like I fit in with anywhere. I started trying to attend college, but there were some of my friends that I knew from inside, and these were the ones that I felt could understand and who I could relate to. So those were the ones I started hanging out with, and that was began the core of our gang right there. I got violated, I think, about 9 months after that. We were at a Taco Bell hanging out, and I guess someone got shot down the street. The police came, the gang unit came and swarmed on us, and they searched the cars. One of the other cars had a gun in it. I wasn't in that car, but because I was on parole, they violated me for being in the vicinity of people with guns.
So, sort of two things happening here. Number one is another raw deal by our justice system. Your only offense, quote unquote, in this moment is being around someone else who did something. That's number one. But number two, you go to jail at a very formative age, right? You go to jail at 17, or this youth unit, and that is such an age that a lot of our being, a lot of our identity is imprinted on us. As you said, you come out and now all of a sudden you don't feel like you really fit in because this formative period for you was spent in jail. You come out and you're hanging out with people that you feel understand you, and those are other people who have been to jail, right? It's not surprising that that's what's going on. And so you keep going down this path that is a very complicated path.
Yeah, I think because there's a part of me, especially later on when I started looking back, okay, I chose to go down to hang out with them. I could have chosen different, but then there was a part of me that felt like this is where I fit. This is where I belong. And these are people that understand me. I came home. I'm now a convicted felon. I was struggling with getting work, and I was ashamed about my past and couldn't talk about it. And, these were guys that I felt understood me.
So your crew goes to a nightclub, and that would end up being the night that changed your life.
Yeah. We went to a nightclub up in Hollywood. Some of my friends ended up fighting with another group of a different rival group. And when I came out, I found out that there was a fight. From there, I put into motion series of us following them on the freeway, coordinating where they were at. I guess they had begun to harass some of the women that had gone with us in a different car. They threw bottles at it and started harassing them, and we followed them and just coordinated where they were at. I think we ended up following for about 25 miles, and then I shot into the car, killed one man named Min Win, and injured a couple other people inside.
And it's not long, right, before someone in your group admits what you did, and you are rearrested, this time for murder.
Yes. It was about 4 months after the murder happened. I was arrested and tried for the death penalty.
So in those 4 months, talk a little bit about where your head was, right? You've just done something. Now, obviously, as we've talked about already, there's been a lot done to you, a lot done wrong, but this is the moment, as you talk about in your book, as you've already told to me in separate conversations, that you freely admit this was on me, I made this decision. At the same time, you have to be terrified, right? You've done this thing. I have to assume at least a piece of you, you probably feel horrible, but at least a piece of you is also terrified that you're going to get caught.
Yeah, I would say it's a mixture of all of that, because by that time, I had been involved with numerous shootings. And so but then regardless, there was a part of me that was terrified that I was going to get caught. There was another part of me that felt triumphant or proud. Okay, I put in additional work for the gang. I get more fame or recognition, and everything else in between, where I felt disconnected, or I felt oh my God, I killed somebody. And there's another part that go, oh yes, I did. This is another strike for me. And it's a mixture of all of that.
And we don't hear about that a lot because, of course, we live in a society that black and white thinking kind of resides. It's either this or that. We don't get the story a lot of the conflict. Now, again, I want to make it clear, neither one of us is trying to excuse your actions, right? That's not at all what we're trying to do. But this simple labeling that our society does. If you've done this heinous act, you are now a terrible person who could only be feeling one thing, this triumphant, as you are saying. That is a piece of it, but that's not at all the entire equation. There is a lot of other emotions going on in this, and you are still a person. There are still other aspects of your life, as we haven't really touched on yet, but your father died a couple years before this. You're living in a single parent household. And there are a lot of factors at play that don't really, the depth isn't acknowledged when we talk about people who have committed a crime.
Yeah, I think that's just how I felt like, okay, I've been arrested for the first time. I'm just labeled this way, and I no longer fit in. It wasn't until years later into my life sentence where I realized that there was all these things that happened to me, and yet there were all these things I chose to do. And where did the path go wrong from there? And accepting it, understanding it, and then realizing that I could use these same choices to find my way out, to find myself again.
So you're arrested. One of your gang members flips on you. You get tried for the death penalty, but they don't convict you of that, right?
They don't. There wasn't enough evidence. By that time, I had got rid of evidence. I had coached witnesses, and they found me guilty of second-degree murder. The jury did not believe that I was the actual shooter, because the person that had testified against me, he was lying on the stand about a bunch of different things, and my attorney proved him to be a liar. They didn't believe. They thought that he was the shooter.
So how do you feel about that? Because as you said, he was lying about a lot. He obviously flipped for reasons of his own, but you were the shooter. Like how does that sit in your head? That you were able, sort of the criminal justice system screwed you over at an early age, and you kind of got one back at this moment.
Yeah, I think at the time I justified it. I say, hey, this guy's got immunity from the prosecution. He's a snitch, and that's how I looked at it. So this guy got nothing coming. So I'm just gonna flip the script and said I didn't do the shooting. It was him. That's why he's up here lying. And that's the way we put up the defense. I guess fortunately the jury believed it, or I would have been on death row right now.
So you don't go to death row, but you are convicted and you go to prison. And it was not a instant sort of reversal, right? I mean, you did not, as you said just a minute ago, you did have a sort of, I don't know if you want to call it an awakening or a mental reversal, but that took a while.
Yeah, it took about 10, 11 years, because when I was found guilty of second-degree murder, so out here in California, that means I was given a 15-year to life sentence. At the time, they were not paroling any lifers at all. From like 1977 on, they had not paroled one single lifer in the state of California. So whether it's 5 to life or 100 years to life or life without possibility of parole, life meant life. You were not, I think one of the governors was famously quoted as saying, the only lifer that gets to go home is the one that gets to leave prison is the one that leaves in a casket. Basically, all lifers were going to die in prison. And so when I went up to the prison system, that was my mindset. Okay, I'm going to die in here, so I'm just going to live the way I want to live.
So talk about that, because I had somebody on this show, another person who was convicted of murder last season, and one of the things that this person was super open about is we who have never gone to prison, which is most of us, are sadly less and less of us every year, but still most of us have very little idea of what prison's really like, because movies don't get it right, TV does not get it right. So what was your mindset being like, this is my life now, this is how I'm going to live?
My mindset was, okay, this is how I'm going to live, so what do the rules matter? If I want to hustle, if I want to get involved with the gambling rackets, if I want to push dope, whatever I want to do, there's nobody here can tell me anything. I'm just going to live comfortably, and I'm going to live here in prison and try to thrive.
So then talk a little bit about what that looked like. I mean, how for those of us who have no context, what does thriving in prison look like? I mean, what does living the life that you wanted to live in prison look like?
Yeah, so okay, so running a gambling racket where people are paid anywhere from 5 cents an hour to a big pay number is 24 cents an hour, or like possibly like if they're working in an industry, the prison industries, you could get up to 75 cents an hour. That's the most you could get paid. And so someone's paycheck getting $40 a month to buy food was to buy a canteen was considered okay. This person's living okay. And then at the height of me in the gambling rackets, I could run the parlay tickets and pull in easily $500-600 a week on just those alone, and are running getting involved with the cell phone trade where we have access to cell phones, and that means you could get on the internet, you could communicate. So it's just our own small bit of freedom, and that's what we just felt. Okay, this is the way I want to live, and this is how I'd like to live. So I think then there's the drug trade and tobacco, which was contraband at the time, and it's just all about being able to have not only money and or food, but then there's status that comes with it, and that continued to contribute to my sense of, oh, I am someone, I am accomplished, I am recognized. There's a very shallow way of approaching it, but that's just how I lived for many years of my life.
And as you said, that was roughly a decade or so of your life. But before we get to your personal sort of change moment, let's pause real quick and shout out where people can find you online, where they can follow you, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they can find me on all social media at Quan X Huynh. That's spelled Quan, and then an X, and then Huynh. They could also find me on my website, quanxhuynh.com, or if it's easier for them to remember, sparrowintherazorwire.com, because I know people might be challenged with trying to spell my name. So yeah, either of those.
Y'all know I love to read, and almost every episode of this podcast includes a recommendation to check out an awesome book. From Adi Jaffe's Abstinence Myth to Johann Hari's Chasing the Scream, I'm constantly looking for new books to learn from and enjoy. That's why I'm super excited to partner with Bookshop. Bookshop is a wonderful website that helps you find all your favorite books and support your local neighborhood bookstore in the process. I've bought everything from textbooks to Star Wars novels on Bookshop, and I've supported my local store with each transaction. Best of all, my Bookshop link will allow you to see all the books I've mentioned on the show right in one spot. So check out Bookshop today using the link in my show notes, or go to bookshop.org/shop/CYS, and you'll find all the awesome books you want and support the podcast in the process. Check it out today. Subscribe to my Patreon for behind-the-scenes looks at the podcast, sneak peeks, and bonus data. You'll also get a discount on Choose Your Struggle merch. Find it at patreon.com/chooseyourstruggle. And the book is fantastic. So obviously, the book really is because of this. I don't know. I mean, how do you want to call it? A life change or a rebirth? What do you see this moment as?
Well, I call it my Sparrow in the Razor Wire moment, and I think that's why I have that title. About 10, 11 years into the sentence, it's, one thing I always was, regardless, wherever my life led me, I've always been a bookworm since a little boy up into all my time in prison. That's what helped me to escape. So I get fascinated with different books, different subjects, and I tend to go down rabbit trails. Let's say I read a book, I'm fascinated with the author. I'll look in the acknowledgments, what other books was he influenced by, what topics, and I get into those. So during that time, about the 10th, 11th year, I became fascinated with, I was somehow reading books on entrepreneurship, and I went down this other path and stumbled on books of the saints, and especially saints that had in one way or another failed in their lives, but yet went on to leave such legacies. And I was very drawn to these stories. Also around that time, I received a picture of my little niece, which is my brother's daughter, my younger brother's daughter. And I remember seeing her picture for the first time, and that picture taking me back to childhood. Like this, she looks exactly like my brother, and it just made me question, how did my life end up like this? What's going on? And so like during all this time, my head is filled up with these readings, questioning my own life, reflecting back to my own father's life, who died when I was 13. I think he died when he was about 37, 38, and that's close to around the age I was at the time. And I contrasted like what he did in his life compared to what I did in my life. So all these things were, I guess, building up inside my mind and my heart and everything. And of course, the books on the saints get me into books on spirituality and mindfulness and down those rabbit trails. And it was just one day on the yard, I asked myself, like, why do I have to view prison as punishment? Why can't this be a place where I could remake myself and try to leave a legacy? And I realized the answer is I could. And it was at that moment when, the sun was coming up over the hills and I could feel the warmth in the little blades of grass. I could see the individual drops of dew. And up above me in the razor wire, I heard a sparrow chirping. And, I tell people that sparrow had been chirping my whole prison term. And I never heard it. But that day I heard it. And I say that day is where the first small spark of transformation began for me, where I saw like, wait, I am just on a journey. And that's what everybody here on this yard is. Many of them much further along. Some of them perhaps not even awakened yet. But I begin to view each day as, how can I remake myself into a better person, even if I'm supposed to die in here? So that's where I got even more fascinated on other subjects of the restorative justice principles and victims awareness and making amends and all these other things that suddenly lined up for me to understand about my place in the world and how I'd like to leave an impact, and how I began, I would have to say, to change my mindset and my worldview.
So there's kind of two different directions I want to go in, but the first one is internal. You said something that I kind of want to focus on for a second. You said the words making amends. Now, is that a thing that you were able to do internally and externally? I mean, part of that is making amends to the family and the friends of the person whose life you took, but the other half of that is making amends internally. What is your relationship been like with guilt? What is your relationship been like with forgiveness?
Internally, that was a bigger struggle. Of course, externally, I knew I could never make direct amends to the family of the man that I killed. But then I could make sure that I could still make amends in that I would never harm another human being. I could try to change other people's mindsets to accept responsibility. And where does this tie in on another tangent with personal responsibility and choices and making impact? The internal part, even after I began to transform, I would say it took me a long time to even come to a part where I could even forgive myself or deal with the shame. I remember it was a few years after the Sparrow and the Razor Wire moment when I was involved with groups and facilitating and leading workshops on victims awareness and things like that. I was in this other workshop and there was this thing called Who Are You? It's an exercise where we write on like 10 slips of paper, who are you and what's your role? Like, so I write like son, brother, and one of the words I described myself was murderer. And then during the exercise, the facilitator led us into imagining like, what does this role mean? Like, what if you crumpled up this paper and threw it away and you no longer have this part of your identity? How does it feel? And I remember feeling, man, this is so freeing. Why do I hold on to this? Why do I continue to hold on to this title for myself? It's still a part of me just unable to forgive myself, unable to fully begin healing. And that's when I realized this is part of the internal part of me that I have to let go. And yet, yes, I committed murder, but I am no longer a murderer. And that was where the distinction came. And I had to learn to embrace that part of it. And that was also a struggle, but that's where it began for even changing that part of my internal dialogue.
So, in a very real applied sense, how were you able to do that in prison, in the sense of you were so wrapped up in this other image of you, like you said, running, different sort of organizations inside? Was that hard to separate yourself from? Or is it hard for you to say, I'm done doing this?
Yes, I remember when I said, okay, I am done with this. That was the easy part, to say I'm done, but then realizing how much of my own identity was wrapped up in all of it, known as a hustler, known as a gang member, known as the person to be connected with, like all of these, and realizing that they were all fake, and having to admit to myself that, I'm a fake, and that I'm doing all of these things were built to impress or built to be recognized. And I really had no true substance as a person. It was terrifying when I came to that realization. But, that saying, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Suddenly there were all these teachers and mentors that appeared for me, whether it's in the form of books, whether it's in the form of people that I ran into, lessons that I'm reading about. And that's where I began to just, basically for me, I had to go back to my child identity, like me as a young little boy before my father was diagnosed with leukemia, how to re-nurture him and rebuild myself from that. And that's where I have to say I began to get back in touch with my old self and build that part of it out.
So the proponents of the prison system say that it is a place of sort of restoration, of rehabilitation, and yet that is not. There's little evidence to support that. So from as somebody who did sort of find rehabilitation in prison, how much of that was you making those choices, and were there actually opportunities that were supported by the system itself?
So I would say the vast majority of it has to be we make the choices ourselves. The prison historically did not have rehabilitative programs. Even when a lot of us began to awaken and help each other, a lot of it was pure created. Like I was involved with creating a grief and loss group. And this prison might sign off on it, but they didn't go and create any of these. We created our own victims awareness groups. We created, we were part of facilitating alternatives to violence groups. So these are things that were peer created, peer facilitated. Of course, there were some programs that later on came in, but no, the prison system is not about restoration or rehabilitation. Mostly it's just about punishment.
And from your book, it seemed to me like not only is that the case, and by the way, that does come through in your book, but also that there were times where the prison system kind of made it more difficult. You talk a little bit about the challenges to your mental health in this place, is specifically in where you eat. You were very descriptive about what that experience was like, being in the dining room, which sounded terrifying, by the way, and physical altercations that you were in that actually seriously hurt you in the process. So I can imagine it would be really difficult to be trying to do this personal growth and rehabilitation at the same time that you're very on edge and very anxious because at any moment something horrible could happen to you.
Yeah, fortunately, I was transferred to a lower level prison where there weren't that many acts of violence. And then because the prison I was transferred to towards the end was considered the graveyard for lifers. It was it's one of it was a level 2 prison at Solano, and it had vast majority of them were lifers. Vast majority of these men had done upwards of 20, 25, 30 years in prison already. So things were a little bit more, I would have to say, chill, like not as many violent acts, and people have done enough time to know how to treat each other a little bit more with a little bit more sense of respect. But yet, yeah, so it was those also contributed to it and helped in a small sense.
So you eventually get an opportunity for parole, which was a thing that I imagine was something that was not even on your radar until all of a sudden it became something you kind of had some hope for.
Yeah, the first glimmer of tiny hope for, I think, for all lifers in the state of California came out in a ruling in 2007 called In re Lawrence. It was a woman that fought her case all the way to Supreme Court that got the courts to agree that there has to be a distinction between life without possibility of parole and life with the possibility of parole. But yet, even when they came out with all these the parameters of it, I fell under what was considered factors of unsuitability, where it says multiple arrests, violent acts in prison, and still had write-ups and all these. So I in '07, I still didn't think that it applied to me. But as more and more men began to get found suitable, that's when I think it dawned like, hey, I think there may be a chance for some of us out here. Because at the time, I think they had to be perfect prison records, done upwards of 30 years and in their 60s. So I never thought any of that would apply to me. But then yet when my Sparrow and the razor wire moment came and I started seeing prison in a different light, I already began to feel free. So it wasn't even about the parole board. It was more, I found this amazing sense of freedom inside, and I'd like to share it with the men around me. And I think this is our key to freedom while we're in here.
And you do eventually get the opportunity for parole, and you're granted that. And you know, I don't want to skip over too much, but in the interest of time, let's kind of talk about that moment now. So you know, talk about what you felt like going into that opportunity, and then when you found out that you were going to be paroled.
Yeah, I first went up for parole in 2014. I was denied, no, 2013. I was denied 5 years. And that was crushing in itself because there were some very hurtful things and harsh things that were said to me inside the parole board. But then on top of that, when I came back to the yard, like there were people that scoffed at me and said, see, you don't know what you're doing. You'll never get out. And then also some family members who I think wrote to me and just made me feel like they didn't believe in me. Like they just thought like, okay, they were concerned more about my mental health. I filed a petition to advance my hearing, and I went back to the parole board in 2015. And inside that hearing, I had to face the same commissioner that battered me at my first hearing. And I thought the hearing was even worse than my first hearing. So I thought for sure I was getting denied. I just didn't know how long it was going to be. Inside the hearing, though, after when they came back with the decision, surprisingly, the commissioner said that she felt I was no longer a threat to society. And that's when she had stated that I could be paroled. So November of 2015, I was released from prison after about 16 and a half years of incarceration.
And what was that feeling like? Talk about that moment when you first heard that you were going to be paroled.
Oh, I broke down crying. I was shocked. I was ecstatic. I was happy. I would say the most overwhelming feeling of all was shock and happiness and joy, because I thought hearing was going bad, and I thought I was going to be denied multiple years, and for that to be almost granted like a miracle, I was like, man, I thank you, thank God, all of that.
So you get out, and how soon after do you start working with this program that you're now working for?
I got out. I was involved with the program inside as one of their entrepreneurs in training, and I paroled before our first pitch competition event. So I continued with the program after I came home, and through continuing with the program, I created my first company 6 months after that. It's a commercial cleaning company, and then when they expanded out here to Southern California to do a post-release part of it, that's when I was asked. So that was about 4 years ago now. I think 3.5, 4 years ago, I was asked if I'd be interested in joining the team as a staff member. And I did. So yeah, that's about 4 years now. I've been involved with Defy Ventures to basically help other men and women coming home from prison to adjust to their new world.
And talk a little bit about what that work looks like, because this is something that we're finally starting to focus more on. That sort of for a long time the narrative was, well, they're out now, everything's fine, but that's obviously not the case. So what kind of work does your organization do to literally help those coming out of prison?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I mean, at Defy Ventures, we believe everyone deserves a second chance, and or everyone deserves a fair first chance, which many of people that are incarcerated did not have. So we began with the work inside. We use entrepreneurship as a lens and a tool to get them to realize that they could be the CEOs of their new lives. So we bring in about 40 to 50 volunteers. They serve as judges for the pitch competitions that are conducted Shark Tank style. It's a 7-month program that uses entrepreneurship, but there's a large component of character and personal development into it. And it gets them to realize that they have value, that we believe in them, and that we're there to support them, especially once they come home. So once they come home, they become part of our post-release services, where we can get them connected, refer them out to other resource providers, bring them to our workshops and events that can help them with practical things like technology basics, email basics, time management, rebuilding credit after reentry, giving them a community just to have them feel like they're a part of something, getting them to be supported by our volunteers who are part of the business and entrepreneurship community.
Well, I think it's such a great program, and clearly you can sing their praises because it helped you, and you are turning around and giving back, which I think is incredible. Thank you so much for being so open with your story. I just think it's so important to for people who are in your position to be this vulnerable and strip away some of the BS that we always hear around, crime and the prison system, and to really tell honest stories. So I very much appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for helping us to shed light and amplify these messages. So thank you.
Well, before we go to the final couple questions, Quan, one more time, shout out where people can find you, where they can follow you, where they can grab the book, and then we'll finish with the last couple.
Yeah, they can get the book off Amazon or Audible, or they go straight to my website. So once again, sparrowintherazorwire.com. You can find all my social media on it too. Or if you want to try to spell my name, it's Quan, Q-U-A-N-X, and then Huynh, H-U-Y-N-H. They can find me on all social media. It's under that Quan X Huynh.
Fantastic. Well, I definitely say this again. Grab the book. I am very lucky to have a signed copy sitting here, and I've enjoyed reading it, so thank you for that. So we finish with the same two questions every time. Number one, not just when you were in prison, but period, what self-care habits work for Quan?
Oh, I have a long list of those. Exercise, reading, listening to music, sharing, having somebody to talk to. Play sports. Listen to the your inner voice in nature. Just give yourself time to decompress.
Those are all fantastic. All right, so the last one that we always do is we've now spent the last 45 minutes hearing about how you're awesome. We should all be following you and your work. But who are some people that you follow? What are you reading? What are you listening to that we should all go check out?
I'm part of a book club that we started right when the pandemic happened. We're currently reading a book called Black Buck. It's hilarious. I would say that it's by Mateo Ascaripour, I think. It's a great book. Of course, people that I love reading is anything Malcolm Gladwell. So I think he just has a new book come out, so I have to go grab that. There's and then of course our work at Defy Ventures. That's I think that helps me stay grounded and realize that I can continue to make an impact in the world.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time, Quan. It's been fascinating to hear your story, and I'm sure my listeners will love it.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Jay.
I am so excited to tell you about my new CBD sponsor, Roadrunner. Y'all know I loved my old CBD sponsor, and I switched for one main reason. This stuff works. I've been a runner my whole life, but unfortunately I'm also super easily injured. One of my high school friends used to call me Mr. Glass. And back in 2015, when I ran my first half marathon, I got hurt, like really hurt. And since then, I haven't been able to run more than 3 or 4 miles without serious pain. That is until I tried Roadrunner CBD's muscle gel. In a few short months, I'm regularly running 5.5 to 6 miles each outing, and I'm currently training for my next half marathon. I don't want to call it a miracle cure, but it's damn near close. So check it out at my personal Roadrunner link, which is roadrunnercbd.com/ref/CYS. Again, that's roadrunnercbd.com/ref/CYS, or at the link in my show notes or on my podcast website. And use the code CYS at checkout to get 10% off on all of their awesome products. Check it out today. Find me on social media. Check the link in the show notes or search for me, Jay Shifman, on YouTube and LinkedIn, and Choose Your Struggle on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All right, we've come to the end of another episode of the Choose Your Struggle podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in today to the 99th episode of the Choose Your Struggle podcast. So I hope you enjoyed Quan's conversation here today. I've read his book. I don't... Everyone who comes on, I at least know something about their work. I don't invite people on blindly. That wouldn't be good for this show. And my team knows that, right? When we're talking about who to have on the show, they are. I mean, I'm very clear with them. These cannot just be a person who, I saw this guy on the news or something. Like I wouldn't, as much as I think, I don't know who's a great actor that I love. I'm looking at my Star Wars collection right now. So let's say Harrison Ford. As much as I love Harrison Ford, and I do. Obviously, my logo is based on Han Solo. I wouldn't just invite him on to invite him on. Like, what would we talk about, right? So I at least know about everyone's work. Quan, I've actually read his book. He offered to send it to me, and my rule is no. I don't want anyone sending me free stuff. So I will pay for it. And my only ask is that they sign it. And so that's what I do whenever there's someone who has a book or something like that who comes on the show. And Quan did sign it and send me his book. And I read it very quickly. It's very good. It's easy to read. Not in the content. It's tough. I mean, there are parts of it that are tough, but Quan has a great writing style, and so I definitely recommend checking it out. It's fantastic. I'm looking at it right now. It's on my bookshelf. It's very, very good. So check that out. And if you want a signed copy, reach out to Quan because he was nice enough to do that for me. So thank you again, Quan. And yes, please check out his book and take what he said to heart, by the way. There's a lot in this conversation today. Your card. We're going to use the Train Your Brain card pack from Dr. Jennifer Sweeten. As a reminder, because this is one of the newer ones, this is 100 techniques to heal trauma and build resiliency. Those, of course, are great tips. These are always wonderful. I've been bad at this lately, shuffling. I'm also, my hand is bandaged right before this, right before I started recording this. I was cutting a bagel because our bagel slicer, yeah, we're that fancy. Our bagel slicer is in the wash, and I slipped and cut into my finger. And it was one of those cuts that, I joked about this, I tweeted this out, that when you cut yourself and it's so deep that you actually don't even bleed for a minute because even your body is like, whoa, like it was so deep, your body's like frozen in shock. That's what this was. So my hand is bandaged, but I'm fine. Everything is fine. Here is your card today for improving emotional regulation. Train Spotting. By the way, very good movie with a guy that I love very much, Ewan McGregor. Not the greatest representation of heroin use, but still a good movie. Train spotting. Shift your awareness to any thoughts flowing through your mind. As you observe these thoughts, visualize them as moving trains, with each train representing a thought. Imagine watching these trains from a slight distance. As an observer, don't attempt to change or interact with these trains. Simply identify each train with a sentence, as in, there is that thought train about X. Your job is to watch these trains, allowing them to enter, move through, and exit your mind at their own pace. Taking the observer stance will strengthen your ACC, which stands for anterior cingulate cortex. That's a great exercise. I don't know about the science part at the end there. That's obviously not my area of expertise. But that kind of goes into one of the tips that I talk about on my class, Mindfulness Beyond Meditation on Listenable. By the way, that's been doing incredibly well. So much so that, there was someone in my life who was like, why don't you just do that full, you know what I mean? Like they were like, just do that. And I was like, I like that being a piece of my work. I don't want to focus 100% on the mindfulness stuff. But that's doing really well. So if you're interested, there is a link in my campsite bio, which is in the show notes here, or just, search for me on any social media, or go to Listenable and search for Mindfulness Beyond Meditation. So check that out. But one of the tips is the one that I talk about a lot, which is the daily check-in, and sort of like this exercise, but I use the analogy of a garden where you really can't know it's down there until you do the work to get down your hands and knees and start digging. And that's all this is. That's all this is sitting back and observing the thoughts that are coming in and out of your brain. We kind of the using this train metaphor, we are only sort of aware of the trains that are coming in above ground, but the vast network of underground of the subway is just as big, if not larger. In most cases, it's a lot larger, and we don't know what's down there unless you take the time to walk down the stairs and check it out. So, great card. Definitely recommend doing that. So, your good egg today is one that I've done it before, I know. In fact, I think I've done it a couple times, but I'm going to do it again today in honor of Quan. It's going to be challenging, one of your sort of predispositions. Let's go with that word. So, like Quan said in this, or like, I guess the message from this episode is that if you just heard, okay, this guy is a convicted murderer, I guarantee you there are about 1,000 things running through your head, and not many of them are good. And some of them are just, some of them are accurate, some of them are earned, but the overall message that you're probably taking away is this is a bad person. And if you couldn't tell from the conversation with Quan, he's not that at all. He in fact, we had a really good chat, both on, for the episode, but also we chatted for a couple minutes afterwards. He's just a nice guy, and shit happens, I don't, and I made this clear on the episode, but I guess I'll say it again here. I'm not excusing what he did, because that's not, first off, who cares, right? I mean, I'm just a podcast host. Who cares my thoughts on murder, or his murder particularly? But also, I'm not excusing what he did. What I am saying is that it's great that he has worked so hard, both internally and externally, to try to do as much as he can to make amends on this, to himself and to those, that lost somebody. We forget a lot that when a murder happens and a person goes away, in Quan's case at the time was thought to be for life, 2 families have lost people. And while there is no excuse, of course, for the murder itself, there is loss on both sides, and there is that hurt on both sides, and for many people. So challenge a thought that you might have had, a preconceived notion. Let's go. I like that better. Let's say that. Challenge a preconceived notion, whether you're in a moment and someone says something and you notice your brain going somewhere, or in a conversation where someone's making a good point and your rush is to tell them they're wrong because that point is sort of counter to what we've been taught for a long time, right? I mean, that literally is the story of my work around drug policy. So that's your good egg. Challenge a preconceived thought. But above all else, as always, be vulnerable, show your empathy, spread your love, and choose your struggle.